In the last lecture, we set up Firebase to have some data there. We added some data to the database and to the storage. Now it's time to head back to the project and fetch that data. We already make a HTTP request, and I basically want to do the same. I want to get the data from Firebase, but now I then also want to update the code to use that data. So for that, first of all, let's see how we can fetch it from Firebase. In the end, we want to fetch this first post here, right? So what we can do is we can simply fetch all posts and then loop through all of them to basically create a card for each post we have in that posts array here. So if you click on posts, you can use this URL here to make your HTTP request. So let's go back to the application and replace URL with this URL here. Now, important, you also have to add .json at the end. This is simply a requirement from Firebase to really target the right API endpoint. Now, since we also use this with the cached and network strategy, let's go to the service worker already and make sure we update our URL parsing there too. Here we're looking for URLs reaching to the GET route. Now let's use our new route here to make sure that every request which reaches this route is handled correctly here and we store the answer. Though this is exactly what we'll also work on in this module because we'll store it differently later, not in the cache. But for now, I'll leave it like that. So back in the feed.js file, now we're reaching out to this page. It should no longer be a post request. Instead, it should be a normal GET request. So we can get rid of all that configuration on our fetch method here. Now we fetch the data. And the one thing I want to change now is here. Right now I just create one card and that's a dummy card. I now want to create a card based on the data I actually fetched. And actually that could be more than one card because maybe I have more than one card I fetched. So I need a whole new way of creating these cards. For that, I'll create a new function and I'll name it update UI. So here in update UI, I now expect to get the data and now I want to loop through it. So I'll create a normal for loop here, starting with I is equal to 0, looping unless as long as it's smaller than data length and incrementing it. So a normal for loop here. And inside there, I want to call create card and pass that data piece I'm currently at to that method so that I create a card for the data I'm currently at. Now create card doesn't expect to get any data yet. So let's add this too. And now we should use the data we get here to really create a card using the data. That starts here with the background image, for example. We no longer need to use that dummy image here. In the end, we will still use this because that's what I uploaded. But I theoretically want to be able to use any image, and later in the course, once we really upload our own images, this definitely becomes important. So I'll simply restructure this to add a dynamic piece to that string here. I want to access data image here to stay in line with the name I chose here, because in the end what we'll loop through is all the data pieces and posts. So what we pass to create card will be a single post, so we can access the image property on this because of that the JavaScript-like structure we have in that Firebase database here. So I can access image here and simply route to that. That's pretty good. Let's see if that works. We'll see it in the next lectures. Another thing I want to do is the title here, of course. We do have a title in our database too, here, title. So let's use that. So I will simply replace this string with data title. We also have a location we can output. So here where I say in San Francisco, I want to output data.location because again, we have that here in San Francisco. So this is now all using the data from my database, so from the backend. And I'm creating a card when looping through it. So now the only thing we have to do is call update UI once we got the data. So here in fetch, we received the data. And now, of course, we want to no longer call create card here, but call update UI. However, passing the data like that won't work because the data we get back here when we reach out to posts is actually not an array, but since we have an identifier here, it's an object where we have key value pairs. The keys will be these things here, so our individual post IDs basically, and the values will then be the objects. So we have a JavaScript object and not an array. So we have two ways of fixing this. We could use a for in loop here simply, but I want to keep this function flexible. So what I'll instead do is I'll simply convert data here to an array. And to do this really cleanly, I'll convert data here to an array. So I will simply loop through all the keys in data, and I'll create a new array. So data array is what I want to get, and it's an empty array at the beginning. And then I will simply say data array push and push data key. So I push all the values, so the objects we have here in these key value pairs, onto this array. And therefore I create a new array which only holds the objects here with these properties. So that's my data array, and now I'm passing data array to update UI. Now clear cards can also go to update UI here at the beginning before we create all these cards. Now in the cache, I also want to call update UI, and of course there, since we receive the data here from the cache, which is our stored response in the end, I also want to execute this transformation code here. So I'll also do that here. And if you want to avoid repeating yourself here, you can of course outsource this into its own method too. I'll leave it like this for now. So pass the data array. We need to create that variable, therefore, here. And now we also update the UI from cache. In our cache, if we have a look at it, we will recognize that URL, and there we will add it to that dynamic cache, so that should still work. So with that, we made some changes, and now we should really render the content from our Firebase backend. Let's see if that works. Now to see this, you of course have to make sure that your development server is running. For me, it still is. And then go back to your application and go to application and make sure to clear the storage, because we changed so much even about the data, how we get it. I don't want to have anything old in the cache. So let's simply clear the storage here. And then reload. And we already see this seems to work, because this is not coming from cache. Instead, this should be coming from the web. And here we can confirm it from web. This is the first post object we get. Seems to be converted correctly. Now let's reload one more time. This still looks good. Now let's reload again to see if it's coming from the cache too. Looks good. And now let's go offline and see if that works. If I am offline now, it still works. So we can still use or still see that card. The key thing is this card is now really coming from Firebase. And to prove this, let me change something in Firebase. So we have in San Francisco here now. So let's change this to near Golden Gate. Let's hit enter here to update that. And let's go back to the application and reload. We see near Golden Gate here. For a fraction of a second you saw in San Francisco because of our cache then network strategy, which first fetched it from the cache. But now you see it indeed is fetching it from the network and updating it from there. So this is pretty cool. Now we have dynamic data. Now let's get back to why our current approach might not be the best and how we could store dynamic data using indexed DB.